And welcome in to Pressbox Live. And I'm Stan the Fan Charles from Pressbox and PressBoxOnline.com. With me is co-host Gary Stein. Gary, how are you?
Good. How are you, Stanley?
And somebody we're very fond of, and if we weren't that fond of, we'd call him a traitor, but we'll get to him in just a minute. That is Ryan Odom, the former head coach of UMBC men's basketball, now the head of Utah State men's basketball program called the Aggies. But I got to tell you that Pressbox Live, as it is every Monday and Wednesdays, brought to you by C3 American Exteriors. That's right. Go to their website at c3america.com to get a brand new roof for just the cost of your insurance deductible. I was with one of the owners of the company last night at the Bowie Bay Sox game, Mark Luderman, and he tells me that they're besieged with people wanting to get estimates on repairing roofs after the hailstorm the other night. I know Mark. I've known him a long time. He helped me start Pressbox. I trust him, and I think you will too. Again, if you need a new roof, and it is the most expensive thing you have that can go wrong in your house, C3 American Exteriors is who I'm recommending. I know these guys. I like these guys, and I trust them. Okay, their website is c3america.com. Now it's time to talk some basketball with one of our favorite people, Ryan Odom. Ryan, about 5.5 years ago, you got hired for the UMBC job by Tim Hall. Was the UMBC experience everything you had hoped for and more?
Absolutely. That's a great way to put it. When we first went there, we went there with dreams of building a program, a winning program, a culture where, year after year, the expectations, would grow, and, the next group of players that would come in, would have dreams of playing in the NCAA tournament and winning championships. And, as you go and look at the totality of our experience there, and kind of, where the program was when our staff first went in there, and then, when we left, it was a really rewarding experience for me. I mean, forget the wins and the losses and the cool games that we had and all that. The biggest thing was the people, the experiences there with obviously the players first and foremost, that we were fortunate enough to coach, but then also folks outside of that, both in our UMBC community and folks like yourself as well that have been so kind to us.
So before I turn you over to Gary for a couple questions, so this situation that you're taking over now came about rather suddenly because the coach there got what he wanted, which was a bigger, loftier paying job. He went from Utah State to University of Utah, but you're inheriting now a program that's been a pretty darn good program for most of the past 25 years. How different is the mindset of taking over a situation like Utah State?
No, it really is different, without a doubt. I mean, this program under Coach Smith and obviously all the previous coaches, that have coached here, have all had a ton of success. And in the last 3 years, 3 straight NCAA tournaments, 1 championship, 2 straight NBA picks, one that's currently playing on the Milwaukee Bucks, one that we hope is going to get drafted here in June, when they have the draft, and actually is at the combine now, or getting ready to start the combine in another week, in Nimi. And we're really pulling for him as well. But yeah, it is a different scenario. It is a different situation. But, one that we're excited about. I'd always said that, if I was going to leave UMBC, it was going to be for a place, that I felt was extremely special, in a place where they really cared about basketball. And I've certainly found that here, at Utah State. The amount of coaches that, have coached here over the years is really remarkable. And obviously you talk about the head coaches, Stu Morrill, Craig Smith, you can keep on going backwards, Rod Tueller, Dutch Belknap, Larry Eustace. I mean, there have been some great head coaches here over the course. Liddell Anderson, way back, the coach Wayne Estes, who was one of the best players in all of college basketball in the 60s, back when Pete Maravich was playing. And then you talk about the assistant coaches that have coached here. Did you know Jim Herrick coached here?
No, I did
Did
not.
you know Dale Brown coached here? Did you know Dale Brown coached here? You
Did
know,
not know that either.
There's a ton of coaches that have, Kermit Davis, who's currently the head coach at Ole Miss, been a ton of guys that have come through here, all great basketball minds. And then you talk about the players, that have come through this program and that still are involved in our program. We truly do have a brotherhood, here at Utah State. And, the more that I've been here over the last, couple of months, the more I've realized this really is truly a responsibility, that I have here and our coaching staff has, to continue that tradition and hopefully increase it and improve it.
So Ryan, I want to tell you something before I pick up on what you were just saying there. First of all, I don't know if I've ever told you this or not, but I consider myself extremely privileged to have literally had a front row seat the last 5 years at UMBC and watch what you've done. You talk about history, and I know that the history of UMBC before you got here, and that I know that history because I had a front seat for that. And I know I have told you this, that what you've done at UMBC over the last 5 years it's from where we were is nearly a miracle.
It's nothing short of a miracle.
Yeah, it's nothing short of a miracle. And from the bottom of my heart, I do want to thank you for that, and it will never be forgotten. So that's the statement.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. But the question is, you just were very well versed in the Utah State history, all the coaches, the assistant coaches, the players. Yeah. But I wonder, though, before you took the job, how well versed were you? Like has your education ramped up over the last couple of months?
No doubt it has. And that's kind of the way these things go. You have to know the place that you're at, extremely well to be able to sell it, to be able to, recruit more players and staff, to come help you really continue upon the path that we all hope that we're going to go on, which is championships and NCAA tournaments and hopefully advancing. We really believe that this program can be a top 25 program. And, it's our job to get it there and not shy away from that. When you talk about how did this thing, materialize, how did it happen? First off, when you're involved in a search like this, probably for a lot of folks, it was a little bit outside of the box. But similar to UMBC, the connection with the athletics director was really strong. I did not know John Hartwell, at all here, really at Utah State. But we did have a lot of mutual connections. He went to the Citadel. He's a Southern guy, grew up in Alabama, in Mobile, has roots in the SEC and obviously Charleston, from his college days. And so we had, very close, friends that were mutual friends, even though we didn't know one another. Tim Hall and I, had the good fortune of communicating a little bit, because of that Villa 7. I met him at that Villa 7 years ago. It was actually out in Portland, the first time we met was in Richmond, I think. I don't think he was out in Portland. I think it was in Richmond. It was at VCU. And, we just stayed in touch periodically over email and that job materialized and, began to learn a ton about UMBC and, all that particular school has to offer, starting with Freeman and obviously he'll be a mentor for life. He and I still stay in touch, as do I with Tim. And then also, here at Utah State, as soon as they reached out, Lucy and I got engaged here,
I know.
and so we've kind of come back this way. My first recruit was my first and best, and always will be my best recruit, was signed right here in Utah. And so to be able to come back here to this place was really, really special. And one of the reasons that I'm here is because of the success that has happened here before me. And, I really do feel it's a major responsibility, to continue that. This place since 2000, since 2000 has had like 11 NCAA tournaments.
Right.
And, teams that are in that, there's probably 20 programs that are within that. And they're all names like Duke, Carolina, Kentucky, Gonzaga, Syracuse. I mean, it's all schools like that. Within that, you have a Xavier, you have a Creighton, you have a Utah State, you have a VCU. I'm not sure if VCU's in it. They might be, but certainly Utah State is, and Creighton and Xavier. And really, that's kind of why I'm here. It's because this program is really special and has tremendous potential. It's not done.
So Ryan, I'm sure you thought about this, but it's interesting that you talk about that history with Utah State, and you yourself said a minute ago, like there's a responsibility that you have now to this program. If you look at the context of the job you took at UMBC versus the context of the job you're taking at Utah State, they couldn't be more different, really, because when you came to UMBC, the bar was so low. And I mean, really, it had nothing to do with you, but the bar had been set so low for so long, there was really nowhere but up. Now you take on a job where you've got, I mean, shall I say, I don't know, added pressure? Is that not even the right word? But to uphold a tradition and make it even better.
Yeah, no question. I mean, they're different scenarios. What I would tell you is Lenore Ryan was in a situation, even though they had fallen a little bit on hard times when I first took that job over. I mean, that coach had been there 28 years, a ton of championships at Lenore Ryan when we first went there. And so it doesn't matter where you're coaching, there's always pressure because you're going to put natural pressure on yourself,
right,
to be successful. And you have your own standards that you uphold or trying to uphold. For us here, we have a lot of positives, to sell at this place. And so if you worry about, all right, well, what if, we don't meet the expectations of others, what about our expectations? And so I want to meet my own, I want to meet our own expectations, and that's to cut nets down and be a champion. And that's just the mentality that you have to have. And that won't change. That wasn't, we were competitive at UMBC. And one of the reasons we were competitive is because we inherited some good players there. I mean, Jairus Lyles was an excellent player and a guy that certainly made me look good as a coach. And having Joe Sherburne there, who obviously was a really smart guy and a guy that, made the most out of his abilities and wasn't afraid to go after it. We recruited pretty well, signing a guy like KJ Morrow was a big deal for us,
absolutely,
at UMBC. And so the way that we'll do it here really won't be any different. We have a culture, that, we understand, and our job here now is to make sure that our players understand that culture that we're trying to create and build upon. And, that's kind of where we're at. And we're in that process right now of getting to know our guys and explaining, kind of how we do things. And we do that in a lot of different ways. We do it on the court with them in practice, and we do it off the court with them in meetings, relative to what our culture and core values are. And so that's where we are in the process right now. And it's a fun process. It's cool because you can't skip steps. You can't just all of a sudden go from, not winning the Mountain West to all of a sudden winning it. All right. There's steps along the way that you've got to take in order to make that happen. A lot of it's related to recruiting. A lot of it's related to culture building.
Gary alluded to the fact that when you got to UMBC, the bar was so low. You have an unusual resume now that includes one of the most, sports altering events of all time, a 16 beating a 1. How do you make sure that one event isn't what Ryan Odom's always remembered for? I mean, not that it's a bad thing to be remembered for, but how do you make sure that doesn't just define you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is I'm not going to self-define myself by my wins and my losses in basketball. I mean, that's not my identity. My identity is probably wrapped up in what type of husband I'm going to be, what type of father I'm going to be, what type of son I'm going to be, what type of mentor I'm going to be for the players that I have. And, I think when you start talking about what's he remembered for, that's more kind of what others would say about you. And, I think the biggest thing for me is that I'll always be thankful for that,
I
moment.
meant it in a
And
slightly
thankful.
different, I meant it in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
I'll never forget when Freddie Lynn won Rookie of the Year and MVP, his first season. And it's hard to top that. Do you
Yeah.
expect that you can top what you did at UMBC?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's my goal, to top what I did at or what we did at UMBC. I mean, I think my goal is to do the best, that I can possibly do for Utah State. And so obviously we're coming in a situation that, there's been recent success, and a success, that, is one of the best in the country, relatively speaking. And so, my job is real simple, is to come in and do our best. And that's what we always tell our players. We're going to try to teach you. We're going to try to help you grow as a player and help you become the best player that you can be. And we're going to chase, excellence, every single day that we're here. And so the biggest thing, that we'll try to do is leave it better than we found it. I don't really want to talk about leaving. I never really talked about leaving at UMBC because I wasn't ever sure that day would come. Well, it did come, and all things are temporary. That was a big decision for me. It was not something that was very easy, to leave that place and leave those folks that were under my watch. I had to sit in that locker room and eye to eye tell those guys and my staff that, hey, my decision is I've got to do this, and it's going to impact you. And there's no shying away from that, at this point. And it became very real for me, when I had to tell those guys that I was leaving. It was not an easy thing. And, this is not my program. UMBC was not my program. It's the school's program. It's the people's program. It's the players that have played in that program. And this place is no different. It's not one coach's program. My job is to leave it better than I found it and do my best while I'm here.
Great answer. Gary.
So Ryan, you talk about looking at your guys in the locker room and, telling them the news. I want to go back to the weekend in March of 18 in Charlotte, the NCAA tournament, but I don't want to talk about the Virginia game, and I don't want to talk about the locker room celebration after the Virginia game, because we all know what happened. It was all over the news, the country, the dancing, the putting up the UMBC on the board. We all saw that. But what we didn't see, and what I do want to talk to you about when you talk about looking your guys in the face and being real, was the locker room after the Kansas State game, the second game, the game that would have gotten you to the Sweet 16. Obviously, Kansas State was a very formidable opponent. But you knew, and your players knew at that time, that this team was never going to be the same. It just by definition, teams are not the same from year to year. Changes happen, coaches change, players change, circumstances change. And that was the culmination. That Kansas State locker room was the culmination of a very, very special time for everybody involved. And if you could just give us a little peek under the covers as you talk to your players after the Kansas State game about what you had accomplished that season, how you looked them in the eye and expressed your feelings about what you all had just experienced.
Yeah, I think gratitude was the biggest thing. For me, whenever a season ends, we talk about this as a team every year. This team has one chance, and it's not going to get another chance. We have one shot at this, to do whatever we're going to do. And the great part about it is we can make it what we want to be. We can make it what we want it to be. And there's no greater example of that than that particular team. Special year, special guys. When we first went to UMBC as a staff, we inherited a great group of guys. that needed to be loved, that needed someone, a staff to, not that the previous staff didn't believe in them. I know they did. But they needed somebody to get them to believe that they could do it. And, every year at the end of the season, it's a sad day. There's only one team, that finishes on a win, in the NCAA tournament that is having a celebration, in their locker room. And so we weren't the only ones dealing with that. What I try to do is talk about the guys that don't have any eligibility left. And so I went around the room and talked about KJ and talked about Jordan and talked about obviously Jairus, and all that they had meant, to the program, and, thanked each of them, for their growth and love and efforts over the course of the 2 years that I was fortunate enough to coach those guys. And I think I talked about, this is not the end. I can't wait to see what's going to happen, for you guys, going forward, and where you end up. Because, that's what it's all about. It's not that 2 years that you get to coach guys. It's the 40 plus years that if you're fortunate enough to get that far, knowing one another, and all of a sudden they have kids. Jairus has a child now,
Yep.
married, has a kid. We stay in touch, and we pull for one another, and the relationship changes, once they cross over a little bit. I'm going to have two former players with me here,
Right.
at Utah State, both from Lenore-Rhyne.
Mhm.
Billy Bales is here, and Keenan Palmore, who played for me. I wouldn't be the coach right here at Utah State if it wasn't for Keenan Palmore.
That's
You don't
right.
even know who he is.
I
He was an
Well, I know-
All-American. He was an All-American at D2, and
Right.
led our conference in point guard, scoring, rebounding, and assists from
wow.
the point guard position. So he's going to be out here with us. And, it's the coach-player relationships are so special. But, I just thank the team as a whole, for all that we had been through. And we had ups and we had downs. And, we stayed true to our core values. Passion is one of our core values, and our guys were passionate. They fought back from adversity to chase what they wanted. And, you can go right through that season, and we had injuries early. We had suspension with KJ at the beginning of the season. We had, all these different things, blown out at Albany, lose at home to Stony Brook, and we're, right before the end of the year. There was a lot of down, to UMass Lowell in the first game of the conference tournament.
Right.
A lot of
Traveled
different,
double digits.
moments that we had to fight back from. And, our guys answered every time. And so I thanked them for that, and for believing in one another and believing in us as a coaching staff, because ultimately that's what it comes down to. Do your players believe in you? And do they believe in the staff and what you're about?
Ryan, I know scheduling is difficult, but would you ever consider doing a home and home here?
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. It was actually, had I re-signed there, it probably would have been in the contract. Had I ever left, would I come back and play? Yeah, that would be something that, we would consider. Typically what happens at our level now is we play the single game deals where it's a bye game,
Right.
The home and homes that we play are more local games, right around here. We're playing, Weber State, we're playing BYU, more natural, you're not going all the way across the country, spending that money back and forth. But, obviously UMBC is a special place to me. So I definitely wouldn't rule it out.
Ryan, about the special place, UMBC, what do you think of the hands, the program that you passed off to Jim Ferry? What do you think about him as a successor to you?
Yeah, I'm excited for UMBC. I'm excited for Jim and his staff. Obviously he's a veteran coach. He's a guy that has had a ton of success, both as a head coach and as an assistant coach. And, I think he's been a head coach. I don't know how many years, 18 years or, 15 years. I'm not sure what the number is, but it's double digits. I know that. And, I really respected what he did in a really difficult situation at Penn State. You lose your boss there, and they make a change before the year even starts. And now all of a sudden he's thrust into this, situation where he's fighting, basically what is the best conference in the country. Last year, every game he's fighting Ohio State. Oh my gosh, now I got Michigan. Oh, now I've got Michigan State. I mean, there's nowhere to breathe and nowhere to hide. And, I thought he did a really good job, with that team in a really difficult situation, especially when you factor in the uncertainty and are they going to keep me? Are they going to keep my staff? Like, what's going to happen at the end of this? They clearly remained focused on doing their best for those guys that were under their watch at that time, never made it about him, or the staff and trying to politic for the job. I just think he coached his team. And he's going to do the same, at UMBC, and he's going to love being there. One of the biggest disappointments that I had for last year's team was just going through COVID. Because we had a special team last year, and our guys didn't get to feel the fans. Had we had fans in that game, against UMass Lowell and in the conference tournament. Maybe we don't, lose it, there at the end, and maybe we're playing for a title. Maybe Vermont is too. Who knows?
Mhm.
It's just we'll never know. COVID, is a unique thing that hopefully none of us ever have to go through again. But it'll be neat to have fans back in the buildings next year. And I know Coach Ferry's going to do a great job. He and his staff. He's got a good amount of guys back. I'm really excited for the team that he has coming back, and I know they're going to be fired up to compete for the championship again.
You mentioned before a little earlier that you've got a player that's entering into the NBA draft. Is that Nehemias Queta?
Nehemias, yeah.
Yeah. But I read up that you've got you had three really tremendous players: Justin Bean,
Yeah.
Marco Anthony, and Raleigh Worcester. Are they all coming back?
So no, Raleigh and Marco
Okay.
He
transferred.
can transfer to Utah.
Okay. They went with Craig Smith. Okay.
And then, obviously we signed RJ and Brandon here.
Okay.
And then we also signed a young man named Rylan Jones, who was at Utah. He was a point guard at Utah.
Hmm.
And so he's coming over here to Utah State. His father was on the staff at Utah with Coach Christowiak, but he also was on the staff at Utah State with Coach Morrill, before. And so Rylan grew up here in Logan, a little bit like me growing up in Charlottesville, when my father was an assistant coach at UVA. Very similar. Like, he fell in love, with the game here. He's an excellent player. He's got 3 years to play. And then we signed two other players, really several more than that, honestly. But, one named Norbert. Norbert's from Amsterdam. Norbert was signed with Utah as well, and got out of his letter there and is coming to Utah State. He's a very good player. And then we signed a guy named Z. Z's from Bahrain. He'll be the first Bahrainian player in the history of college basketball.
Wow.
Really? Wow.
Pretty cool thing for him to come over. And then another guy, Craig and his staff had signed a young man who's here now, named Kate Potter, who will be on our roster, as well. And is a great kid from California, just came off his mission.
So what was his first experience like with you having a new job and entering this whole transfer portal thing? Do you think it's good for college basketball? Is it good for the kids?
I mean, obviously you never want to see kids be unhappy and feel like they need to leave. But at the same time, if you really look at it, all the other sports are doing it just like we're doing it now. Like, if you're a lacrosse player and you want to transfer, you don't have to sit out a year.
Yeah.
You get the one-time transfer and you can go, play elsewhere. And so it's worked in other sports. It'll settle in, with us in our sport, as we get deeper into it. Does make it harder and more challenging when there is a coaching change, because it's easier for guys to leave. There's not that big of an attachment. And I think that's one of the areas where we can separate ourselves. One of the things that I've found here is, like, if you grow up an Aggie, you're an Aggie here in our state. And there's an attachment regardless of who the coach is. And then you add in, the LDS, side of it as well, where these kids go on their missions, they're gone for 2 years, and then they come back, they're a little bit older, and they're just a little bit more mature. They've been through some adversity and been away from their families. And then all of a sudden they're kind of immersed back in their school, and, they're committed, they're committed to their school. And so I do think that's a separator for us. I like where we sit in college basketball in regards to the transfer portal. We can get guys like RJ and Brandon, who were first team all conference, that want to challenge themselves a little bit more and move up, a level. And then you can get guys that, are at the highest level, that maybe they want a little bit bigger role and they want to come down just a notch and still play on TV every night and still play in packed houses and play in a multi-bid league, like we have in the Mountain West. I mean, it's competitive. I mean, you think about our league every night. Go to UNLV, it's packed. Go to San Diego State, where Kawhi Leonard played, it's packed. Go to the Pit at New Mexico, it's packed.
Yeah.
Come to Utah State, it's packed. I mean, it's what college basketball is all about. I like kind of where we're at, relative to that.
Gary, you got a couple more questions and then I'll wrap it up with one.
Sure.
Does that sound good? Are you okay time-wise, Coach?
Sure.
Okay.
So Ryan, along those lines of some off the court, issues in terms of college basketball, you talked about the portal. I don't know exactly where this legislation is right now, to be honest with you, but I'm talking about college players now able to take advantage of their likeness,
Sure.
right? And I'm sure at Utah State, at least at that level, it's a little bit more of an issue as opposed to at the lower levels. Have you wrapped your head around it? How are you approaching something like that?
Yeah, I think it's a good thing overall. I don't think anybody's wrapped their head around exactly how this thing is going to play out. I do know that a lot of this stuff's wrapped up in the courts, and we'll eventually settle there, and direct us in the way that we need to go. But there's certainly our folks, starting with John Hartwell, and then the folks within our department, our compliance, coordinators they have committees set up. And, they're working through exactly how it's going to look, certainly at Utah State within our conference. That's the interesting thing is you go across state lines, it can be different, in different states. And so hopefully they'll come up with a uniform, ruling for all of us. I know the NABC did a webinar last week, on name, image, and likeness. And, one of our assistants was on that call as well to try to update us, kind of where things are at. But, the biggest thing is making sure that, if a kid's able to earn a certain amount, for his likeness, why shouldn't he be able to get it? We're not in the business of trying to hold folks back. As long as we can make sure that it's fair across the board, and in terms of, throughout the country, then I think it's a good thing, for everyone. You think about what happened with us and when we were at UMBC. That could have been, I have no idea where that would have gone, but, for some of our players, but probably could have been a pretty good deal.
Could have been big. Yeah.
And so who am I to hold them back from that?
So my final question, I'm sure you had a conversation with Dr. Rabowski, after you took the job or when you took the job, and just wondering, I know he has and he will mean a lot to you in your life and vice versa. how that conversation went.
Yeah, I think again, it was similar to in talking to the players, kind of at the end of our time together, right? While it is the end of our immediate time together, it's not the end. And, he and I will always remain close friends, and he'll always remain a mentor for me. Any big decisions that I make, I guarantee you, I'll probably call him. Any advice that I need, I know he's going to be there for me. And so, watching him over the course of that 5 years interact with not only our team, but our staff and our department as a whole, seeing how many people he mentors and how willing he is to help folks. He never makes it about himself. He's always trying to help others. And, it's a great lesson, for all of us, in life. And, the more that you do for others, the more, eventually it comes back to you, and makes you feel, really good. And I know he feels great about where UMBC is right now as a university, and we're coming out of COVID, and he and I will always remain connected, as will I with others, on campus. I mean, I'll miss all the coaches in the department. I'll miss Pete Caringi telling me, "I got this Slurpee for you, baby."
Right.
We're getting a championship,
That's right.
And all the others as well. I mean, what a year UMBC had overall,
Yeah.
And you'll miss
really was a great year in sports.
You'll miss doing the pregame shows with Gary Stein.
I know. And forget Feinstein. I mean, come on.
Awesome.
Hey, my last question for you, and it's interesting. Gary and I knew you weren't a lifer at UMBC, but you never made anybody feel like, hey, I'm just here passing through for a couple of years. And so I'm asking you this question with that in mind, because I know you fairly well. Jacob Nielsen of the Utah Statesman said about Craig Smith when he left Utah State for the Utah job, while not the expectation, there was a hope that Smith would do the same and follow the path of Morrill, or better yet, the path of Mark Few of Gonzaga, and grow Utah State into a mid-major perennial power. But these days, those types of coaches are few and far between. The current reality, Utah State is just another mid-major stepping stone for bigger and better. Would you like nothing more? I know you're only there 2 months now, to prove that to be inaccurate.
Yeah, no question. I mean, certainly this is a place that, a lot of coaches have stayed a long time, and we don't know, the decisions. You can't, fault Coach Smith for leaving and going to another opportunity. He felt like it was right for him.
Yeah.
And certainly we support him for that. He's always going to be well respected and well liked here at Utah State. Once an Aggie, always an Aggie. And we'll always be appreciative for what he did for our university. And everything, we're all interim. That's the reality of it.
Yeah.
We're all interim, in our jobs. And that's why we have to do the best that we can while we're gifted and we're blessed, to have the opportunity to do something with it. And, for me, I'm just going to try to make this the best that it can possibly be. And with my staff, I'm very fortunate, to have my entire staff come out here from UMBC. I'm not having to coach the coaches and the players at the same time. These guys, they were out here day 2 once, it was apparent that, UMBC was going in a different direction. They were out here, they were in the practice with me, and it was like nothing had changed, and so, we have a way of doing things here, and we're going to do the best that we can here at Utah State for as long as they'll have us. And if it comes a time where we're charged with doing it somewhere else, or they don't want us to do it here anymore, then them's the breaks.
Well said. I don't know you quite as well as Gary Stein, but I've grown very fond of you in the time we have spent together. thank you for, and I know Gary wants to say something else, but thank
I
you.
just have one more quick thing.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
thank
So-
you so
yeah.
much for being a part of one of the most exciting runs that we've seen in Baltimore sports history and Maryland.
Okay.
sports
Thanks so much, Stan. I appreciate you guys.
Okay,
Yeah,
Gary,
and,
go ahead.
Coach, if I could, I don't know if you guys recognize this. I'm just gonna go over here for one quick second.
Okay.
This book here,
Oh, yeah.
you're gonna recognize it now.
Yeah, I
This is
see it.
Kevin Cowherd's book about the game, basically. And Coach, I just want to
Yeah.
let you know, this is the most prized sports possession that I have. And I've read it twice already.
Have you
So
really?
thank you for this.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. Absolutely. I thank Kevin for, doing such a great job with that. I've had actually my wife and I had two of them, and I signed one for one of my neighbors down the street in Annapolis. And he and his wife read it in like 2 days. And, even they didn't even know the history, of
Right.
kind of the entire totality of kind of how the thing went down. And just really appreciate him chronicling that for us. It was really cool.
Well, we know you're going to do great things out at Utah State, and the folks out there in Logan, Utah are going to love you out there, and they're lucky to have you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Coach.
Thanks so much for having me on, guys. You guys take
All
care.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Before we leave, I will tell you, and Coach, you don't have to hang around for this. I will tell you that this show was brought to you by C3 American Exteriors. Go to their website at c3america.com to get a brand new roof for the cost of your insurance deductible. And as I always say, there is no greater expense that you might have on your house than fixing or putting a new roof on it. You got to know the people that you deal with, like them, and trust them. It's just like recruiting in college basketball. You got to know them, like them, and trust them. So,
I needed you 3 years ago when I put my roof on my new roof on my house in Annapolis.
hey, this company is going, they're going national. They may be able to put a roof on out in Utah for you before.
And
too
I'm
long.
joking. I'm joking, by the way. They did a fabulous job.
All right. Hey, for
All righty.
Ryan Odom, Gary Stein, I'm Stan the Fan. Gary and I will be back next Wednesday night with a sports business talk with Marty Conway and Andy Dolich. Till then, we'll see you down the road.